The first monster that must frighten the audience in a horror film is the filmmaker himself. My whole career I made films that your parents warned you against. And people say, you must live in a cave. And sure enough, they'll usually say, I just didn't expect you. I expected, and I say, what, Charles Manson? They say, yeah, kind of. With The Hills of Eyes, we knew they would be after us. So here's another, film from the damaged mind of this guy, Wes Craven. I was raised in a fundamentalist Baptist church, which my mother started going to when my mother and father were having problems. They didn't allow smoking, drinking. That was fine, but no movies. So I didn't really see, with the exception of Disney movies, I didn't see any movies in a theater until senior year in college, amazingly. And at the end of graduate school, still no plan except to be a writer. I went off and started teaching college in Westminster College in Pennsylvania for a year, and then Clarkson College in Potsdam, New York. I started seeing movies and became completely addicted to movies. And it was mid-'60s. It was during that period of just incredible richness from Europe, Fellini and Buñuel and Truffaut. So I got the bug, and I bought a camera, and I was just having a lot of fun. And my department chairman came to me and said, I don't know what you're doing fooling around with all this stupid movie stuff, but you're not going to have a job next year if you don't start on your PhD. So here I was married, I had 2 kids, and I went around to all my friends who were working on PhDs, and I said, well, what do you think I should do? And they said, don't do a PhD, it's horrible. It's years of drudgery and everything else. And so I went back to my department chairman like the next morning and said, I quit, and I'm going to get into the movies. And he just laughed in my face. And I must say, I really felt like I was insane. So I went down to New York and looked for work. My first job in the film business, and I was $70 a week messenger. But, within 10 months I was assistant manager of the post-production house. During that time I met another young guy, Sean Cunningham. And Sean had done one small film for this company in Boston, and they had told Sean, now we want you to make a scary movie. So Sean, he said, listen, you say you want to be a director, so why don't you go write something scary? And I said, I don't know anything about writing a scary movie. He said, well, you were raised to the fundamentals. Just pull all the skeletons out of the closet, I'll never forget that advice. So I went to a friend's house on Labor Day weekend and wrote Last House on the Left. And we got $90,000 to do it, 16 millimeter, and it got picked up by AIP and became a huge success scandal / thing. 3 years later, Sean and I had both been trying to make other kinds of films. And meanwhile, I'd met Peter Locke.
I thought he was very talented, a very smart guy. And he could do anything. And he had gone into the horror genre on Last House on the Left.
And he kept saying, you got to make another scary movie like Last House.
And I thought it was a good shot for us to take.
I kept saying, I don't want to do another one. Last House was very controversial, and a lot of people looked at me like I was insane. I resisted until I was broke. And finally, Peter says, listen, my wife's out in Vegas, and we can do something out in the desert, and just come on out. Well, write something for the desert. So I went to the New York Public Library and went through their murder and mayhem division and ran across the story of the Shawnee Bean family, which was, I think, a 16th or 17th century family that was cannibalistic, that would prey on travelers.
They were like highwaymen, but worse.
They would eat the horses, they would eat the people and everything, and they lived in a cave that was on a cliff facing the sea.
And on high tide, you couldn't find them because the water came in, and there was no trace of where they lived.
Finally, they were found by a survivor, ran away, and went to the king, and the king sent an expedition. The expedition found them, and took them back to London. They did horrendous things to them. They broke them all on the wheel, hanged the women in front of the men, and then they dismembered the men. And I was so struck by how you have, on one hand, you have this feral family that's killing people and eating them, but if you look at it, they weren't doing anything that much worse than what civilization did to them when they caught them. And I just thought, wow, what a great kind of A-B of culture, how the most civilized can be the most savage, and the most savage can be the most civilized.
That was the basis of The Hills Have Eyes.
I think I wrote a couple scripts. We were, clearly a couple of guys that were just on our second film and kind of winging it.
I'll get the money, and you write the script. We'll figure out the cast together, and let's go.
It was really ridiculous.
I said, let's go to California, and we went we went on our way,
The location is outside Victorville in the Mojave, which is the high desert, about 100 miles from Los Angeles. A rented car, and we asked this guy we rented from, how do you get out? And we showed him a topographical map of this area in the desert we decided would be interesting. He says, you go out there, you'll die. It basically says it gets 125 degrees out there. And we said, well, okay, we'll take water. So we took I think a 6-pack of Pepsi and some water and drove out in the middle of the desert.
I'd been to a lot of different places, but not the desert. This was my first desert experience.
It was probably summer, sometime really stupid, like the time you should never go into the desert. And you could drive for miles and miles and not see anything. The first time we got out of the car, because it was an air-conditioned car, we could not believe the heat.
It was 106, 114 degrees.
It just hit you like a furnace. We're drinking water, drinking Pepsi, went through, wow, can you believe how much fluid we're putting down,
And we just kept going and looking and finding, and we wound up in Apple Valley, the big dry lake there.
And we got out of the car, turned the car off, and oh, this is great. It's really a hauntingly beautiful place. There's just vast spaces that are open and unused. It was virtually just abandoned.
I remember that when we saw it, we said, wow. Those rocks are forbidding, but they're also enchanting.
We got back to the car, no fluid, and the car wouldn't start. It was just, we looked at each other like, oh my God, we're gonna die. We're a bunch of stupid New Yorkers out here.
In the middle of the middle of the middle of nowhere.
And 3 more cranks and the car started, and it was just like, whew. But that was how we found the place. It was like pointing to a place on the map. I remember we cast here in Los Angeles. We had a place on Sunset Boulevard.
The audition consisted of crying. Everybody had to cry. Cry, please, now. And the test was who cried the best, who got the most scared and burst into the best tears.
Actually, the only thing I did before Hills was a religious film called All the King's Horses from Mark IV Pictures.
My agent had said, oh, God, don't do this movie. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's a horror movie. You don't want to do that to your career. And I love horror movies.
Bobby.
And I just loved Wes Craven. So I went, well, I have to do it.
What it meant to me was a big break.
It's a Mayday, Mom, not Maypole. Mayday. Oh. Oh, here, let me. Mayday, Mayday.
I mean, when you're starting out, you just want to work in something that hopefully people are going to see.
What the hell was that?
So Hills really is the start of my, professional career.
I was not the first choice for this part. Some other guy who was cuter and, I don't know, more believable got the part, but he turned it down. And they came back to me and said, so, are you still available? I said, yeah, please.
We also were looking for very unusual types, and we had a parade of bizarre, tall, huge, geeky, strange-looking people.
They first wanted me to go up for the girl, part Dee Wallace played, and I really wanted to play the animal girl.
Don't you make a noise when you walk.
Here.
Oh, no, you don't.
That's a challenging part, something I can just bite my teeth into it.
Part of the casting, I know, for Ruby was that she had to be able to run very quickly, so we would have foot races out in the parking lot for the actresses.
Wes had his chosen few line up outside in the parking lot.
We wanted to see them run to make sure that they were athletic and they were going to be able to handle what Wes had in store for them.
And so he said, 1, 2, 3, go, and everyone ran. I stood there and he looked at him, he looked at me like, why aren't you running? And I went, whoosh, and just took off and bypassed everybody, hit the pole, made it back, and he went, gave me that look, and I ended up getting the part.
And then Michael Berryman walked in, and he's really extraordinary. He said, look, I have, I think, 26 birth defects.
I was born premature, and my cranium wasn't fully formed, so I had to have some reconstructive surgery. And there's the fissures on the side of my head from where they cut through with the scalpel and spread the skull apart, and then put some bone spacers in there, and it fully developed, and that's how we got the the face that we got.
At the same time, it was very bright and completely, on top of everything.
And I'm going, what's this story about? Okay. Okay, and I'm one of the cannibal family members?
He took direction and was just a wonderful guy. So he was, of course, immediately hired.
And we went out to the desert and kicked some ass.
Eventually, after prep, we shot most of this in Apple Valley. I just remember the hotel was overrun with us.
It was just a small hotel. And, we would go out every day from there.
In fact, I drove one of the Winnebagos every day, and we'd fill the Winnebagos up with people who needed a ride to the set. The paved road probably went on 10 miles and then 20 miles down a dirt road to get to the location.
When I saw the size of the production, I thought, this isn't really a movie.
The conditions were primitive, to say the least.
It was an exploitation film. You figure it out.
Low budget means inexperienced people who are willing to work hard and not the best conditions. And that's what this was.
I mean, it really was, let's put on a show.
Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, let's put on a show time.
Most of the time I ended up doing my own makeup.
We had a blast. We're all in the same boat together. Felt like we were a bunch of college kids, going out and making a movie, having a good time.
Not really knowing a great deal about, exactly what we were doing.
Everybody was learning, and it was very, very low budget.
I think our budget was somewhere between $275,000 and $325,000. To me, that was a huge budget. Last House budget was $90,000, and we had a crew of 7, and this we had a crew of like 15. So wow, we were really smoking, Eric Saarinen was actually quite a cultured young man, son of Eero Saarinen, the architect.
I think I had done You Light Up My Life, and that made money, and so Peter Locke was interested in that, and he pretty much said, you'll do. I worked my way up through Corman Films and features, Summer School Teachers, Eat My Dust, Death Race 2000. I pretty much picked the crew.
As a young film crew working with Corman, had made probably a dozen films already, so they were much more experienced than we were.
I wanted to shoot in 35.
I didn't have a thought of ever shooting in 35 millimeter. I mean, 16 millimeter to me was just, it was so much better than 8 millimeter.
16 is a definite, handicap. On the other hand, it's faster. It's easy to handhold and still do sync sound.
I think the cameras were all rented from a famous California pornographer, if I'm not mistaken. We got a deal on it.
Well, I'll take a look around. I don't see any.
Didn't hear you. I was just cleaning up.
I'll fill it up and check the oil and water.
Give you what I got. Ain't got much. I'm just closing down.
As bizarre as the premise of the film is, I've always struggled to make the people in it seem real.
Don't you mind them. They just want to play. That's a good girl. Odd. Telling you we're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I wonder how far it is to the nearest cheeseburger.
That white bread family from Cleveland, those were people that I grew up with. That mother was like my mother,
You folks go right to California and have a good trip. You folks stay on the main road now, you hear? Stay on the main road.
There's this family, and they've inherited a silver mine. They're driving through someplace in Nevada or something. They're from the East Coast. They don't know shit, and, they go off across the road. There are a certain amount of American horror films that are about getting off the main road, getting off the beaten track, and getting, in essence, leaving civilization. It just makes you feel vulnerable and makes you feel small. Makes you feel like you're suddenly thrust back to a time when human beings were very small figures on a big plane. One of the things I did with The whole family they're consciously stripping away everything that they had of civilization to protect themselves. You know, first their car and their trailer, and everything was just taken away from them. You see what they have when they're down just to their core, resources.
Never you mind.
And there's a Pharaoh family. The names of the Pharaoh family were based on the planets. Papa Jupiter, he stood for the primal father.
I heard you tried to run away.
No, Papa, no.
That father that you just would never, ever cross.
I fixed Grandpa pretty good. I like fixing people good.
His ferocity went beyond anything you could imagine.
You heard what?
I'll go find him.
And Pluto is the least known of the planets and kind of strangely shaped. And Mars, of course, the god of war, and so terrified by your father that you can't find your own manhood.
Did you kill them all like I told you to? Did you kill them all like I said?
Ruby was like the gem among the family that, was different. It had that sort of ray of hope within her to break out of the family. I guess it was the first time that I was just fascinated by this kind of flip side of everything in human culture. There's a Pharaoh family and the white bread family, and they all match each other, sort of the dark side and the light side.
I think the location is one of the stars of the film. These prehistoric rocks, which sort of tumble up into the sky, a very creepy kind of dinosaur landscape. They found a really creepy place to shoot.
I was looking for something that was primordial, sort of at the beginning of time-ish. There were a lot of ways to get hurt out there. I mean, everything had spines and spikes and burrs.
Don't step on that choyo cactus. Don't get near it, it'll jump out and bite you.
It's just nature at its rawest.
And you're doing take after take, and you're running along. Try not to trip, try not to slip, not hit cactus.
You could so easily lose your footing and just break your skull wide open. I mean,
I was wearing these really high shoes because I'm on the short side, and so, I wanted to look tall and leggy, and just running through that desert. Lots of bruises and scratches, and I really got scratched.
I remember Wes Craven keep saying, "She's still too pretty." And so they kept putting more dirt on me and putting black on my teeth.
Logan! Take me!
I just remember climbing up and down and having to really get into the dirt and the grime and being cut up and being dirty. That was a tough shoot, though.
well, I think the wear and tear on everybody in this film was pretty extreme.
Here's a bunch of little actors in a trailer in the middle of nowhere, telling a story about a bunch of desperate people in a trailer in the middle of nowhere. So making the movie feels like the movie.
I just remember being incredibly tired.
Well, they're like 12-hour days, sometimes 14-hour days.
6-day weeks.
It was so hard to get it all done in the time that we had and in the environment we were shooting in.
You have to shoot like hell. You just keep doing it. I mean, you have to get through it.
You need to stay focused.
When you're constantly fighting the sun going down.
My primary memories are died of the heat, froze of the cold. That's it. There was no in between. In the daytime, it was unbelievably hot.
It gets up to 120 some degrees, and it's just like, it's like standing by a furnace. I think we had tarpaulins up all the time that we could duck under, hydrate.
Get in the shade, stay hydrated.
There was no relief.
I think I was taking a bottle of water and pouring it on my head.
The heat, the heat beats it out of you badly. And at nighttime, as soon as that sun went down, we started freezing.
So it would be down to, in the 30s. You'd end up bundled up in sweaters and down parkas and whatever else you could throw on.
The desert is freezing. You freeze your beezers off. It was, we would be out there before the sun, and it would be 40.
The lowest morale was when we were shooting night stuff inside a cave, and it was raining like hell, and we were standing in 6 or 8 inches of water. It was probably 30 or 40 degrees.
We had nothing. We were wearing garbage bags for rain slickers.
We were just, sopping, and there wasn't anything we could do about it,
And the wind, dry wind. I mean, if you watch the movie, you'll see us blow